Okay, so today's lesson 5, and we've kind of done a very brief introduction to Firebase in our breakout sessions. We answered a few questions about how it works. So we're going to have a look at Firebase briefly. So we're going to be using the Firebase console, which you can find at console.firebase.google.com. You will need to log in with a Google account for this. And we'll kind of walk through what does the setup sort of look like. I'll give you an overview of what we're going to do before we dive in and actually do the implementation and the coding of it. So once we're in the console, we're going to want to create a new project. So basically, you're probably going to need 2 separate Firebase projects for this course. We're going to make one project for our in-class application, and then you can make a separate project for your assignment. One of the comments that I got in the feedback survey was, somebody said they'd really like it if we could just build one app in class and keep adding features on the way that we've done in if you've taken classes with me previously, a PHP class or a .NET class. And yes, we're going to start doing that today. I know we've been building separate apps every week. So the app we create today, we're just going to create it today and we'll keep working on it for the rest of the semester. So we'll create a Firebase project to serve as the back end of that app for the rest of the term. So we'll go in and we'll create a new project. I'm not going to do it right yet. And then this is kind of what the Firebase Assistant looks like in Android Studio. It's under the Tools menu. There's a Firebase Assistant, and it shows the various Firebase services. So do we want analytics? Do we want authentication? And then there's 2 database options. The real-time database, which is the original product. We're interested in Firestore, which is the newer, kind of more robust database engine. So we're going to use the wizard, and as was mentioned in our breakout session, we're going to when we add Firestore, it's going to add the dependencies we need to our Android Studio project and the Google Services.json. Yes, Lynn. Oh, no problem. I didn't even realize we had that raise hand feature here. It's quite useful. So we're going to use the Firebase wizard to connect our project. So it's going to do something like this. It's going to ask us to connect our app to Firebase, and then specifically to, yeah, I'll charge 5 cents for every raise it hand spam. So we'll connect the app, and then it actually gives us some sample code. We'll use some of it, but not much of it. So to connect to our database, we'll just call Firebase Firestore.getInstance. That actually will connect to our database. And we can either connect, it's got a couple of overloads. We can connect to the database generally, or we can also make a reference to a specific collection. So if we've got different collections in the database, and we're only interested in working with a particular collection in one activity, we can connect directly to that collection instead as an option. So when we create the Firebase project in the console, we're going to get these 2 options when we create a database. And there's actually a little bit of a wizard, and it's asking, do we want the real-time database or do we want Firestore? So the real-time database is the original is the original database product that Google offered, and all the data is stored, I think I mentioned this earlier, in a single JSON tree, whereas Firestore is newer, and it allows for a more complex data model and also offers better scaling capability and also a better query engine, a more sophisticated query engine. So Google, this text comes right from the Firebase console. In general, they're recommending that we use Firestore. If we've got a really simple app, we might want real-time database, but we're going to use Firestore. That's generally what Google recommends for new development. So when we go to create our Firestore database, we're going to get asked this question around security. If we want to start in production mode, all the data is private by default. Okay. So we would need security rules in the app in order to read and write. We're not going to implement security right away, so we're going to pick this option of starting in test mode And that will write a set of rules in the database in a JSON format that's basically allow access to our database for a period of 30 days from the time we create it. Okay. So for our purposes for now in class, we'll start in test mode. We'll look later on at toggling to production mode and adding security. Okay. So our permissions are going to look something like this, that it matches any document. So our wildcard will have read and write access if the document is less than 30 days old. That'll be our kind of default permission for now, and we'll tighten up the security later. One of the things the Firebase Assistant does is it generates this file called google-services.json. This file basically has all of the connection information to our database. We can access a copy of this file in the console, but if we use the assistant, the Firebase Assistant generates this file and adds it to our project automatically. It's also going to add some dependencies to build.gradle. Now, I think the versions in this screenshot are a little bit old, so it's going to add a reference to Google Services, the Google Services Gradle plugin, as well as a library dependency so our app can connect and talk to Firebase, and specifically to Firestore. In the console, you can actually view your data. So the Firebase console looks something like this. So we can see inside of our database a list of collections. And then inside any collection, we can see the individual documents. And inside each document, we can see the keys and values in there. So we can actually add data through this console if we want. If you wanted, for example, to populate to seed your database with some initial data, you can do that directly in the Firebase console. So what does this look like within our Android app? So if we're going to connect to Firebase, we've got a couple of different ways to connect. So option A, this would be that we're just connecting to the database in general. We're not connecting to any specific collection. I just create a database variable, and I call Firebase firestore.getInstance. So that uses the instance that's specified here in Google Services.json. Or if we wanted to work with a particular collection, let's say I had a collection called sample collection, we could append on here, we could chain the method and also specify that the collection we wanted was sample collection. So saving new data would be something like this. We'll use a version of this code. So we would get an ID for a new document, and then we'd have some kind of object that we'll define in our Android app. We'll set the ID property of our new object equal to the new ID that comes from Firestore. The IDs are automatically assigned in Firestore, just like they are in MongoDB. And then we would basically save our sample object, which we'd be populating from our views on our activity. We'd be updating that document to push those properties to Firestore. So we'll do this. We're going to start with this. We're going to build a simple activity with a few inputs and a save button. And when we save, we're going to take those inputs out of our activity, populate an object in our app, and then we'll push those object properties down to Firestore, where we could then see the new values in the console. So that's kind of roughly what reading data is going to look like. Sorry, writing data. Reading is more complicated. So we would first need to connect to the database. We could write a query. So we would list reference the collection we want. If we wanted to sort, we've got an order by. We could order by some node in our JSON tree, and we could set the direction up or down. And then we'll need to use a bunch of classes. Let's say we want to run a query and then display those query results in a list. We're going to use 4 different classes, maybe 5 for this. In the UI, we're going to use a class called recycler view. So recycler view is for displaying a list, a scrolling list of elements when either we have a large amount of data or we've got data that might change regularly. Okay. So the recycler view is basically like a container. And then inside of it, we have to create a template for what does each row or each item in that recycler look like. So we're going to add a recycler view into one of our activities and define the template. And we're going to use another new class in here as well. We're going to use the adapter class. You're probably familiar with this from Java. So an adapter in Android and Kotlin, it's the same as adapters you would have used in Java previously, used for binding a set of data to some kind of UI component, to a view. So we're going to use the recycler view adapter. We're also going to use the Firestore recycler adapter. So this class is really designed for connecting Firestore data to a recycler view in an Android activity. And the last class we'll need is a view holder. So the view holder basically describes one item and also lets us control how we're rendering that particular item into our list. And it's got methods we need to work with, what happens when the view gets created, and also what happens each time we bind a new record, a new set of piece of data into the view. So we're going to work with all these classes together. And not only are they going to be able to show our query results, but we also have methods we can add to keep that data current. So if new data gets added, it's constantly watching for additions, deletions, or updates to that data. So it's always showing, and as I think they said in the video, in near real time. And I've put these slides on Blackboard, and here's the link if you want to read more about these classes. So I've linked directly to the recycler view class, but in that description, you can find the details for these other classes. Okay. So we'll be working through all of this today. We may not get it all done. I would hope to be able to finish and be able to both create and read and display data before we break for the weekend today. If not, it's something we can resume next week. Okay, it's 5 to 12. Probably a good time for us to take a break. Are there any questions from anybody before we do? All right, so if there are no questions, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 12:05. In the meantime, I would encourage you may want to open up Android Studio and just temporarily let it open last week's project because there was another update from Android Studio yesterday. Yeah, there's lots of updates. So you may want to go ahead and get it updated now. So when we come back at 12:05, you're ready to go. I'm going to go step away for a minute and I will be back and we'll resume in 10 minutes.